It will examine their current capabilities, potential dual use, and evolving international policy responses, and of course, implications for the convention. So, in order to explore this issue, we will have a conversation with four experts. And this session will follow a conversational podcast style format. And I'll be asking questions, and together with the questions that you submit to the Q&A, we will be giving them to the experts. And we aim to keep the discussion focused, accessible, and of course relevant again to the convention. Throughout the event, we welcome your input. Please use the Q&A function, which can be found at the bottom of your screens. Your questions and comments will be treated as anonymous, and I will post them to the speakers to enrich the discussion. So to get started, I will ask the panelists to introduce yourselves. Who are you, and what's your connection to AI biodesign tools? Let's go with Cassidy.
Hi, everyone. Very glad to be here today. I'm Cassidy Nelson. I'm the Director of Biosecurity Policy at the Center for Long-Term Resilience. And I lead a small team that works on preventing extreme risks from biology, including those that may be enabled by artificial intelligence. And so I have a background in clinical medicine and a PhD in biology, but it was actually upon attending the Biological Weapons Convention meeting of states parties back in 2017 that I decided to leave clinical practice and switch my career to preventing catastrophic biological events, given the scale of harm that's possible when biology is misused. So at my center, my team has examined risks from AI biological design tools in depth over the last few years. And I think it would be important to note in recent work that we've completed with RAND that there is currently a proliferation of tools in this space, and misuse relevant capabilities are coming online at a rapid pace. I'll pass over to my other panelists for their introductions.
Let's go with you, Sana.
Yeah, absolutely. Great to be here. So I'm Sana Zakaria. I'm a senior research leader for emerging technologies at RAND Europe. And I work at the intersection of AI and life sciences and biosecurity governance. So my focus is really on understanding how emerging AI systems affect biological research, where they might create new opportunities, and where they introduce risks that matter for global norms, norm setting, and for multilateral forums like the Biological Weapons Convention. And our focus is very much on driving research, policy analysis to support multilateral consultations on responsible AI and biotech development. And as Cassidy mentioned, we've recently done a flagship study on characterizing misuse capabilities from biological design tools. So that's how I have that connection. And we look at it from multiple various lenses, which I'm sure will come through in the conversation.
Thank you. Yensi, over to you.
Hi, very nice to be here. Thank you for having me. I'm Yensi Flores Bueso, originally from Honduras, now living in Ireland. I am a synthetic biology researcher at University College Cork, and I trade in computational protein design, which is using AI to generate de novo proteins at the Institute for Protein Design, one of the global leaders in this field and home for the 2024 Nobel Prize in Chemistry. Professor Baker. I am also a member of the international group of scientists preparing the 2027 Global Sustainable Development Report and co-chair of the Global Young Academy, which I represent at the UN Secretary General Scientific Advisory Board. Well, with these hats today, I want to share science-grounded perspective in the biodesign technologies, and particularly in synthetic biology and AI-driven protein design. Thank you.
Thank you, Yensi. And Geoffrey?
Yes, thank you very much, and welcome everyone. I'm Geoffrey Otim. I'm the founder of SynBio Africa. SynBio is synthetic biology. Actually, it's a good progress from my fellow speakers. Is more focused on synthetic biology. Yes, so I've been so much focused on promoting and advocating for synthetic biology in Africa for the past 7 years. That's when I formed SynBio Africa, which is a platform for bringing all stakeholders, students, policymakers, scientists, researchers, so that we can enhance this new technology to address some of the challenges we have in Africa. And we also do that by organizing conferences where we encompass AI, biosecurity, and synthetic biology by bringing policymakers, scientists, and then we discuss the progress. We also implemented the Global Catastrophic Biological Risk Initiative in Africa, where we were in all the 4 regional centers across Africa, organizing technical training workshops to build capacity on pandemic preparedness. And my background is in molecular biology, but I'm much interested in synthetic biology and biosecurity. I've consulted in different expert group, OECD, UN, CBD on synthetic biology platforms. So briefly, that is about me. Thank you.
Thank you. So that's the expertise we have in-house today. And I think that for warming up our audience, I would like to start in the same order. If you could share one fact or insight that our audience should pay attention, or why our audience should pay attention to AI biodesign tools today. Cassidy.
Thanks, and happy to start us off. So as I mentioned, our center, in collaboration with RAND Europe, completed a large global risk index looking at biological design tools, and we looked at more than 1,100 tools for this publication. And as a part of that, we were able to assess misuse relevant capabilities of state-of-the-art or the best performing in class tools. And concerningly, we found that more than 60% of those that were flagged red for potential concerns were already fully open source. This means that their code, their weights, their training data is available online and effectively just won't be able to be withdrawn. And we found that there was no correlation at all at the moment between misuse relevant capabilities and their open source status. And so while this has benefits for science, it also means that we're in a new era of lowering barriers, and future models will be even more powerful. Sana.
Yeah, I can come in next. I think building on that, some of the things that we hear quite a lot in the policy space as well as in the scientific domain is that, biological design tools, there are so many of them, a lot of them are just not that great. They don't really they've not been shown to have that many beneficial use cases. So how could it be that they're so dangerous? And I think to that, one interesting and striking development that I'd like to highlight to people today is that recently there was a really interesting piece of research that was done where AI biological design tools, a range of these different tools, were used to design new viruses called bacteriophage that attack bacteria. And they were used to design these in a way that they hadn't been seen in nature before. So they were entirely new genetic blueprints that, when built in the lab, so the other thing you say is that, we don't know if it will work in the lab. Well, they built it and they tested it in the lab and it worked and the viruses were able to infect and kill bacteria. And so this really shows that AI is starting to push the boundaries of actually what's biologically possible. And that's something I think policymakers and the public should be watching closely for both exciting prospects, but also for their dual use potential.
Well, I want to kind of bring on like the potentials, because, proteins are nature's molecular machines, and they carry out every biological process that keeps us alive. For example, in us, the enzymes that digest our food, the insulin that regulates our sugar, endorphins that shape our emotions, and the antibodies that build our immune systems. And to explain how this work, in the protein world, shape means everything. And how a protein shapes determines how it behaves and who we eat and interacts with, So our cells are bustling cities of proteins all the time. They have about 1 trillion of these molecules all the time, all interacting with each other with remarkable precision, like a key in a lock. So for decades, scientists have tried to understand how or what are the laws that determine the shape of a protein. And only until very, very recently, with the computational power of AI and trying to test different dimensions of geometry, physics, and chemistry, is that we are now starting to understand this, and can using these laws, we can build new proteins, as mentioned, that do not exist in nature, but also we can predict, what will be the structure of a protein using the alphabet of nature, which is amino acids that have 20 letters. And we can make proteins that are far more stable in a way easier to produce and with less time. So it's very important that we take this into account, because this can solve urgent problems in health, food security, climate, and a lot of pollution, for example, problems, and can sort the kind of solutions that evolution will bring upon if we give it that time. But we don't have time to wait for evolution to happen. Thank you.
Yes, picking from evolution. So from all that has been said, you can see that AI is evolving very fast than the policy that we have in place to regulate. And so we don't need to wait until it's too late before we put the policy in place. If we can remember how AI actually reduced the timeline for vaccine development up to 6 months, that is a record time. So that is what AI is capable of doing. So it has reduced the time that we used to take in research and development from years actually to months. So that is already one of the capability of AI, but of course with other side, the other bad side. But also in terms of expertise, we have seen that at the moment, you don't need to be highly expertise in a specific science and technology field. So long as you can be able to utilize the available AI, you can be able to actually come up with a good technology that can solve some of the challenges that we have. And also, you don't need a lot of resources like before. DNA synthesis is now very cheap. But of course, it comes with other, dual use, because anyone with nefarious, intention can now synthesize a deadly virus, and assemble a deadly virus. So all these reduction in time, expertise, and resources has both beneficial and harmful effect. So we need a policy to be able to, govern some of these AI tools that are coming up. So basically, that is what I can, contribute for now. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. I can hear like four topics already, starting about the quantity, like how many design tools are already available and how many are already in the red zone. I also hearing about the novelty, like we are introducing never seen to nature, maybe new viruses. I'm hearing also the dual use, the Yensi talks about all the benefits that come from this technology. And of course, finally, I understand that another point that is important is what's the role of policy and governance. So to understand this landscape a little bit more, can we talk about where are these biodesign tools in November 2025 and what key capabilities are emerging in the next 12, 18 months, perhaps? Cassidy?
Yeah, again, happy to kick us off. Speaking just more broadly about the landscape, I think that there's two words that could really define where we are today in 2025. And those words are acceleration and diffusion. So we've seen an acceleration in tool development, and in our RAND-CLTR Global Risk Index, we found that in the last 2 years, there was as many tools released as in the preceding 4 years. But beyond just the number of tools that are being developed, we're seeing an acceleration in what's truly possible with these tools. And it's really no surprise that last year, the Nobel Prize in Chemistry was awarded for 2 biological design tools, AlphaFold and RF diffusion. And then the second word, diffusion. This is truly a global phenomenon. Again, in our work, we've found that 76 different countries were contributing authors or companies involved in designing and creating biological design tools. And we're also seeing a diffusion of actual capabilities. We're going from more specialized tools that are highly effective at a single task, such as protein folding, to a much more generalized biological foundation model type of approach, of which there can be more components of a workflow included within a single tool. And so we've seen a proliferation of that as well. And when I think about the next 12 to 18 months, it's in particular the integration of different capabilities that we're seeing already coming online, but that'll continue to accelerate, and agentic AI, which will really allow multiple steps to be completed in a more autonomous fashion by AI agents as we gain those capabilities. And so where I think this is relevant for the BWC is that we're now shifting from a world in which the proliferation of AI tools makes a burden on Article 4, from controlling purely physical access to actually governing computational tools. And so traditional national implementation measures, such as like export controls on pathogens, are just going to be increasingly insufficient. But yeah, I'd love to hear from my other panelists how they see the landscape as well.
Yeah, I think just to extend what Cassidy's already said, I entirely agree. I think over the next couple of years, what we're going to see is actually also refers to Geoffrey's point. We're going to see things that happen in the biological domain that are much faster, potentially outputs that are more accurate, and through generative tools. And I think we'll have just better and better tools that design not just smaller components of biological experiments, but the whole end-to-end pathway. And so we are, as Cassidy mentioned, seeing more closer integration with robotics, with self-driving labs, with feedback loops built in as well, where you have AI-driven outputs that can be tested in a lab, and then those test results are fed back upstream to improve the data set that's used for training the AI model. So you kind of have this self-improvement cycle that emerges, right? And so that's where real world data then starts to, and this is novel data that you've just generated in a lab, starts to then feed back into the model and actually just have this cycle of self-improvement. And it's that self-improvement cycle that I think will really exponentially increase capabilities that we see emerge from here. So I think I'll leave it at that and invite comments from my other panelists.
There is one interesting thing about that compartmentalization, when you do things in different pieces. And this reminds me, I was recently in a conference in Kazakhstan, and then they were explaining about how was the whole process of when they had nuclear weapons, bioweapons. And one thing that they explained was that in the time, different researchers were doing different parts of the process. So they even didn't know where all the pieces were integrated together and to what end they were collecting this data or doing these experiments. So I guess a question perhaps for Yensi and Geoffrey will be, what makes some tools particularly dual use?
Well, so far from the computational protein design side, or like using AI for computational design, I would say that in this case, it requires a lot of research input. It might be that the models will improve in the, 18 months, 2 years, enough, that it will require less input. But I can tell you and guarantee you that to draw your hypothesis of what you have to model or what you have to do, you have to put a lot of thought, and it requires high skill expertise to determine what are the atomic interactions that you want, and you have to make these instructions, give these instructions to the models who are just really, really strong, calculators that calculate like millions of dimensions of geometry and physics. And then it gives you a huge number of potential structures as a output, But then the researcher has to then analyze the data, and kind of put his expertise, his skills or their skills to determine which would be the best candidate. So it's getting better. Like there's less outputs needed, but there's still a lot of involvement of researchers in the meantime. So I would say that in the next 24 months, yes, the diffusion models or like the prediction models might improve. We might learn more about them also because we sometimes don't understand them completely. And I think that they will be more precise and faster, but they still will require a lot of human supervision. There's a lot of supervision that is needed in the experimental design, in the analysis, and before making these outputs, computational outputs into actual DNA, and physical things that you come in. I think that's kind of a strong input. And after that, when you do the experiments, most of them, or like you expect that at least half of them will fail, So it's still expensive, but it is getting more high throughput, and I have seen experiments that now you can do several at the same time and try to model it, but it's still not quite there yet. It still requires a lot of science skills.
Yes, yeah, that was really in detail. So I think we have heard of gain of function research because sometimes researchers, they want to know why this particular, group of people are not, susceptible to a specific like virus, or they don't get infected. So they will always try to use AI tools, to do the prediction, do the sequencing, and then they look deep into the sequence results, and then they see what is different from the other side. So in the process, they will, try to, engineer and see if we manipulate this, will this group be able to also get infected? Will they be vulnerable? So that is what we call gain of function. And it has both the good side because they're trying to get intervention, to protect the other side. Why the other side is vulnerable and then this side is not vulnerable. So it is both for the bad and for also the good, if it turns out the other way around. So we have had situations that it actually turns into, a issue of pandemic response, actually. So another thing is that I've talked about the cost of DNA synthesis. First of all, there are models that can predict for you novel sequences of a virus or a bacteria you want to actually assemble. So it can, predict for you. And then the sequencing, the synthesis is already very cheap. And then there is what we call the garage scientist. You can just sit in your garage somewhere and do all this assembly illegally. And it's not regulated because all the knowledge are, on the website. With AI like ChatGPT can provide you all the protocols you need to assemble a particular a sequence that you have ordered. So all these, are things that we need to really take it into consideration. If we don't have enough policy and regulatory framework to, govern all these and the reporting to make sure everything that is done is, being monitored and, regulated. So basically that.
Since we are talking about tools and these tools are dual use, how can we evaluate a tool's biological sophistication has already crossed a threshold? And how do we put a threshold? I mean, what will be the parameters that will make the security risk increase?
I'm happy to just quickly kick off on this. I think I would probably say something controversial here and say that maybe asking if the tools are dual use is not a good question because all biology is dual use, right? So that's like already a baseline where, the answer is not really of consequence. So I think when we think about the dual use or misuse potential rather of tools, we should be thinking about what does it let us do that we wouldn't otherwise be able to do, and what kind of, from a security context, what kind of people does it enable to do things that we don't want that kind of capability in those hands? So that's kind of how I would think about it rather than dual use. So it's more misuse potential rather than dual use potential, because all of it is dual use. And so that actually brings us to the point you talk about around sophistication and thresholds. So I think, I'm going to draw from the work that Cassidy and I did on our risk index. And the way we think about it is that what are the biological capabilities that the tool can faithfully reconstruct and enable, that actually mirrors what happens in the real life, real world sort of space. And that gives you some biological sophistication parameters. So for example, optimizing, harmful agents, or increasing the stability, or being able to evade immune responses, for example. So looking at really those biological capabilities that you kind of rely on to protect yourself, and those could be tinkered with, for example. And then you look at the other aspect of sophistication would be, how easy is it, or how accessible is it to actually utilize? Is it some random thing that is really hard to use that only your most, sophisticated lab scientists could use it in a niche part of the world? Or is it something that's really intuitive, really easy to use, gives you step-by-step instructions, and really lowers the skills or equipment needed to carry out the work? And then the other is evasion capabilities. How many of those tools actually produce outputs that can help hide dangerous designs? And we've seen some studies come out on, where you might rely on something, a sequence resembling like smallpox, or something that's on a list of some sort, select agent list or an export control list. But are there tools? And yes, there are, can create sort of outputs that don't resemble the sequence of the thing that we're worried about, but resemble the function of the thing that we're worried about. And that is also possible. So I think those are some parameters I would propose that are really important to look at when you particularly think about the misuse potential of tools and looking at their biological sophistication and their capability levels. Yeah.
I'll build on your excellent points, Sana, because I do just think that's really important. Biology is all dual use, but misuse relevance is not necessarily shared equally across all of these tools. And so being able to rank them in these structured ways, I think, is just incredibly important. And so I wanted to highlight a few other areas, building on Sana's points, that was in our risk index of how we thought about ranking tools for misuse relevance. And one is really looking at the shift between prediction and generation. So some tools could simply classify existing biology. They're able to predict if a molecule is toxic. But going to a higher level, once tools are able to actually generate novel biological designs that don't exist in nature, or be able to optimize for certain functions reliably with the designs that they come up with, there's a new level of worry. A second area is generalizability. And so a tool might be trained narrowly on a narrow data set and only apply to a certain class of bacteria, let's say. However, there are various tools now that are trained on larger amounts of data or even smaller data sets, but are able to demonstrate generalizability across a range of different pandemic pathogens, families, no longer just single species applications. And so that also leads us to have more concern if there's generalizability in this way. And as Sana already mentioned, you just can't assess these in a vacuum. We approached our risk assessment looking at a composite score that looked at both the actual capabilities that a tool possesses, but then actually it's also accessibility and availability to be able to take into account how technologically mature the tool was, and whether or not it would be lowering barriers for potential misuse. Great, and Yensi, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this as well.
Well, I do agree that there's diffusion models are good enough that they can create simple proteins at this point. That's done, like binders, for example, and require less supervision. But it's the point when it becomes like more complex, and you can actually, as you say, generate designs that will affect several organisms, or like require multi-step control in reactions in our bodies, for example. And when you can modulate like that, you have achieved a level of complexity, that is quite surprising, and it can be exciting also, but it will definitely be dual use and needs a bit more regulation. I do want to bring up here that it's in the labs in the labs where these technologies are still available, because they're still not available to every lab. There's a lot of regulations, but I think that we are at this point in time where we can see that, as Geoffrey and everyone else mentioned, this may be democratizing. So how do we prepare for a future where they may be available in labs that are not as secure? Because, I remember that when I was in the IPD, there were like inspections, exams, and courses, and a lot of things that we had to take care of to comply with the biosafety of the organization. But I wonder, in organizations that are not like that, once these technologies become available to organizations that are not like that, how do we make sure that they still comply to the bioethic principles, so that there's no accidents, or because at the end of the day, I see this as a very good potential to solve problems, and that we should democratize somehow that technology to increase its access, because I will say that it's more dangerous not to generate them right now to solve our problems than not using them.
Yensi, you raised really good points, and I just want to jump in there and say, we have the really quite applaudable T-Engine biosecurity guidelines, but that's mostly focused on wet lab scientists. I do think that there might need to be an extension to think on computer scientists and AI engineers, given what's possible computationally now as well.
Excellent. So thank you, because you are already bringing up different aspects of the convention, and you, Cassidy, even mentioned Article 4, and now we are talking about the Tianjin biosecurity guidelines that are also being mentioned at the moment in the document that is going to be negotiated by state parties in less than 2 weeks. So if we go a little bit more in depth and think about the BWC implications, from your perspectives, what are the most relevant risks coming from AI biodesign tools that are posing, I said risks, but maybe also opportunities?
I think I want to build on Yensi's excellent point, which is one is around biosafety, right? And that refers to more the accidental catastrophes that might arise. And that's where we definitely want to equip our scientific communities worldwide to be able to utilize these tools, because they are still very much underutilized. That might change over time. And we are seeing this change over time, especially when tools become more user interface friendly, right? So in some respects, that's a good thing. But given that the BWC relies on national implementation at member state level, how can the BWC ensure, or is it its job to ensure that actually member state level implementation, the tools are there, the frameworks are there, the infrastructure is there to secure and actually conduct experiments of concern in an environment where accidents don't happen. So that's kind of more on the positive side, securing things that we must do to progress, well-being of humanity. And then on the other side, it can also, this technology can also erode safeguards that the BWC relies on at the national level. So at the national level, for example, we already have a lot of developments happening on synthesis screening. Can we put in a checkpoint between the digital world and the physical world, and how feasible is it to put in that checkpoint? And lots of us are working in that space to assess the feasibility, utility, and the benefit of these things. But if you have tools that are creating mechanisms to evade screening, then you have this issue where you don't have global screening, first of all. And in the places you do have screening, if they don't keep up with the technological advancements and patch their systems, then even where you do have screening, it could become inconsequential. So I think these are some of the challenges that the BWC would face, is to how to ensure that at the national implementation level, the existing systems are keeping up with the technology, and the places that don't have implementation mechanisms, how can they be supported to actually create a safe and secure environment to use these tools and capabilities?
Yes, I can say it's great points that you mentioned, and I completely agree. I think that, governance so far has become, like in SynBio and in this field, it's about the DNA synthesis, It relies a lot of DNA sequence synthesis. But as you mentioned, Cassidy, for example, there's a lot of de novo design. So the sequences, the relying on sequences, it's not reliable anymore. You need to this is a barrier that you have to overcome. And also, synthesizers have become more like, desktop kind of equipments nowadays. I mean, you still have to buy the reagents and all the equipment, but what you can do is, for example, what has been done, as it has been done right now, is that you can only buy DNA if you're an institution that is recognized, like a university or something. So you kind of safeguard that, and then you sign a commitment that this is not like a protein or like a topic of concern, like a sequence of concern, sorry. And another thing that might be, useful, it might be that in the future, we or the science and technology advisory mechanism can adopt something like commons, a commons of all these platforms and computational tools, or like even some databases, for example, that can be used by institutions that have biosecurity compliance. So that might be a point that might be taken out. Thank you.
Thank you. We have actually a comment from the audience, and they mentioned that the production of bioweapons with the system of AI biodesign tools will be covered by the provision of the BWC because of Article 1 and the general purpose criterion. So this participant is asking if states should focus on prevention by agreeing on implementation of more robust surveillance protocols. What do you think about this part on prevention and investing more in surveillance?
I think it's a great idea, and I think it's part of the picture. I don't think it's the full panacea. Surveillance would be able to allow you to detect some nefarious activity, but many of the tools that are being developed now are things that can be put up online and then downloaded and then used in an offline setting. And so pure monitoring of usage and use cases is not possible with the vast majority of these tools at the moment. Until we have a kind of more move towards cloud-based things behind an API access, our ability to do surveillance, at least of design, is going to be a problem. Surveillance of events themselves, like actually detecting a pathogen after a release event itself, is another part of the picture. But again, we need much more robust systems in place for this as well. I do think that one way to think about this as well is we have an acceleration of capabilities at the moment, and we really want to keep the defensive capabilities that would be enabled by AI going along at a faster pace than the offensive capabilities. And there's been less prioritization, I think, than optimal in discussing on how AI could actually be leveraged to improve things such as surveillance, improve things such as detection, but then also in screening, as to previous points, how we could use AI to actually understand and do functional prediction of AI-generated sequences to prevent novel synthetic creations and purchases on the commercial market as well.
So since we are talking about the misuse, we already talked about dual use, and everything in biology could be used dual use. So how can we reduce that misuse? Will it be through safeguards, thresholds, delineating red zones, many lists? I mean, how do you see the whole, you said panacea, right? So how would you envision all the things that need to happen in order to secure that we continue in a war free of bioweapons? Yensi?
Okay, so I guess that for the misuse, in general, these tools are first introduced for research, for improving humanity or like solving a problem of humanity. So in general, it starts in academic labs, and then it's about involving also all other labs that may be involved in this kind of research or development, and try to build the biosecurity training or like biosecurity compliance that we need to fulfill, because at the end of the day, these systems do have a good it's dual use. You can use it for very good purposes, and it will solve a lot of humanity problems. So I guess that with the right training and the right guidelines in place for all research institutions, and think of how to integrate all other institutions that are coming to join research institutions to use and apply these systems to also comply for this. I think that will be a good start.
Yeah, to add on that, I think all this comes back to the scientist who does all this. So empowering scientists to really do responsible engineering biology is one of the key things. And if our scientists can be incentivized to really do responsible science in their labs, while also taking into consideration all the biosafety, biosecurity measures that every institutions put in place, that would be a good step, because all this responsibility starts with us, the scientists, before we blame the policymakers. And also, the developers of these AI tools that we are talking about. I think we should also not blame the technology, but the developers. They should also, be monitored, so that whatever they develop also go through some checks before it is, made available to the public for use. And also, I talked about, it is now very easy to access some of this technology and, do your synthesis, and it bypasses the conventional biosecurity, biosafety that are always put at the institutions. So what about the people who are doing, I talked about the garage scientists. It's very hard actually to, manage people who are doing, biology outside of the formal research environment. And they are there actually. So how can we make that also part of, the regulatory framework to govern all that? So a lot of things are in between that, we need to take into consideration. But personal, having that responsibility on the side of scientists is the starting point for me.
I'm going to slightly disagree with Geoffrey. I do agree that scientists have a personal responsibility and duty of care to behave responsibly, but I also feel like we exert quite a lot of pressure on the scientific community, and what we really need to be doing is equipping them to work in this space and innovate and help us prepare for pandemics that are likely to emerge from various pathways. But I also think it's the responsibility of others in the ecosystem, because what we really need to be focusing on is those kind of other communities that fall outside of those structural frameworks, because that's probably where some of the security risk might come from, and the kind of risk that we are concerned about. Because I think we tend to sometimes regulate the responsible scientist more and more because it's easier to do it because they're there and they're working in that space. And I think that's still important, right? That's why we have policies around synthesis screening, because it acts as a deterrence mechanism and we should all behave responsibly. But I think we need to probably exert more effort on other parts of the system, because I personally think it's not enough to just look at the scientists, especially given that we are looking at computational tools and there's a huge developer community developing these tools, and there's a huge funder community funding these tools. And what about responsibility of those actors? And why are they not thinking about, well, can our tool be misused? How should we be deploying it? Is it okay to put the entire code out into the universe? And I think the responsibility needs to go up the chain to those other actors as well, but also downstream to publishers. Should publishers have a duty of care to actually think about, well, this is a great scientific endeavor, but should we have some kind of, redaction of some of the aspects of this that could be an information hazard? So I think better information hazard policies and awareness are needed across the system rather than just with the scientific community, because they are just one part of this ecosystem that's generating really novel, innovative capabilities and utilizing it, but they're not all of it. Yeah.
Just to follow up with Sana, I agree, and well, that's what I say, that in the research environment, that where we have capabilities, or like at least we have we're using this for research and development, we are governed by those, like we cannot apply for a grant if it's something that it's going to be dangerous. There's no funding body that will give us a grant to develop something that is dangerous. And usually grants always asks us for like what is the biosecurity or the ethical component of these grants, nor the institutions will allow us to do this. And when we are in the lab, we have to follow several like strict protocols of biosecurity. But the problem comes when things come out of the lab, For example, in synthetic biology, when startups or companies that fall in unregulated spaces or like vacuums, that is a problem. I have knowledge of a company that has gene therapy, for example, in a country, in an area where there is no regulation whatsoever because of a vacuum in the law of the country. So I am concerned about, what are the biosecurity practices that they have in this gene therapy clinic, in a small island in the Caribbean. Are they complying with the same biosecurity processes that I do? Where do they get their DNA? And now the problem is that DNA synthesizers, they're becoming a desktop machines. You can buy them. So it's harder a bit to regulate this area. And that is my concern. And that's where I would see the risk coming in, when it's outside of research institutions, which already have very structured regulations on biosecurity. Thank you.
Thank you, colleagues, because my next question will be to you. Who should be responsible for governing these biodesign tools that are enabled by AI? And just to add to that question, I'm going to read a comment and also a personal conversation I had with someone working at the EU AI Act office. And we were discussing about these tools, and what she explained to me, and please correct me if this is wrong, she mentioned that the current EU AI Act is for frontier AI. So that means that the AI biodesign tools fall through the cracks. So they will not be governed by this, but by the EU AI Act, which for some people, they say that is like a model of what other countries could copy as well. So again, who should govern these tools? And to add to that question, I'm going to read a comment that was given by one of the participants that says, are AI-enabled biodesign biological design tools inherently intangible? And how should they be treated under export control frameworks for intangible technology? So you have mentioned scientists, you have mentioned also I think the role of philanthropy. I think that also gives some amount of money to do research. So that means that ideas and the scientific hypotheses are not just coming from universities, they are also coming from philanthropic organizations. And of course, innovation is coming from the industry. And then we're also talking about export control. So who should govern these AI biodesign tools under your perspectives?
Happy to jump us off, and it may maybe be a little bit provocative, and to say maybe the question is who is responsible, because we have them here, and us understanding, you know, is there already existing duties and obligations, I think might be a good one to contemplate on. And I do think that responsibility is shared. Under Article 4, member nation states do have a duty to prevent proliferation within their own jurisdictions. And tools could be a means of being able to enable proliferation. And it's also the private sector that both understands their models better than most others, including regulators at times. But they would be responsible for implementing codes of conduct, and for being able to evaluate potential misuse relevant capabilities of their models. And then there's the wider international community as well too. We need a lot of international coordination to be able to actually see on proliferation, see on enforcing safety checks. And so I think in many ways we have a shared responsibility that already exists under this. And to the excellent comments made, I do think inherently it is intangible. And so us thinking in older school ways with regards to physical versus digital access, we need to move beyond export control frameworks, which focuses primarily on physical possession, and look at access to capabilities themselves. And I do think it would be something that would be what the first thought, if something does, if an event were to occur and there was a realization of perhaps the gravity of the situation, of what capabilities are available, I think one of the first things that would be clear is that we do want to have better control of access to advanced capabilities. That doesn't mean just restricting access. That does mean also privileging access to those who are working on defensive capabilities. And so I don't think it needs to be seen as just putting up more guards, but actually making sure that people involved in making countermeasures, people involved in beneficial research should be privileged with access. But that we need to move to a world in which we understand the true dual use nature of these capabilities.
I agree with Cassidy that, you know, we're using old school framing around digital and physical, and the boundaries are blurring, and you know, you kind of have to look across the spectrum, because some areas are more ripe for prevention and some areas are more ripe for deterrence. And so if you think about it from all of those angles, it's an interesting concept around export controls and intangible technology. I think we're kind of seeing some elements of this where countries are saying, oh, we're going to have data sets, which are not physical things, be declared strategic assets, which means that they would actually have some restrictions on sharing outside of a given country. I don't know if you could do that for tools as such, and it might be too late, or nor do I think we should do it for tools. But there is a question around data sets and outputs, and how we might think about it. But I think you always then make trade-offs with access and equity, which is a huge problem. So you'd have to overcome those challenges. And this comes up a lot, right, on benefits sharing agreements in that kind of context, where, you know, when people sequence, like when COVID happened and sequences were emerging, and countries were negotiating on how can we gain access, and, you know, what will people get in return. So I think these can become then fairly contentious issues, and we need to avoid those outcomes, because that's not really helpful. But I think it's an intriguing concept, and we might see more and more of that happen, but I don't know how we apply it in this context, but it's something worth thinking about.
Um, Geoffrey, do you want to?
Yes. So my point is that one size always doesn't fit all. So much as we have regulatory framework, like for Africa, we have Africa CDC that has biosafety and biosecurity framework, but it may not work in every country the same. So for me, I would think that the responsibility would start from each institution, like a research institution, strengthening their IRB to really scrutinize all the research that are proposed in their institutions. And then also it goes to the National Biosafety and Biosecurity, team that actually govern the whole biosafety and biosecurity aspect for the country. They should also strengthen, their operation to make sure that they also review whatever outcome that the IRB at respective institutions have come up with, so that they don't miss anything to be, given a go-ahead, a research that could potentially be having a negative focus. And then also, the framework like EU, you have talked about EU, but I've also talked about the African perspective. It's the responsibility of each country, to optimize it for the benefit of their country, customize it to fit in their regulatory framework, and also make sure they actually, implement it and also enforce it. I think it is the responsibility of the country now to enforce, because I know that BWC is there, but their hands are also tied. They can't really enforce, but they can monitor and see how the countries are really implementing it. They cannot do much. So responsibility start from institution, the government bodies that govern biosafety, biosecurity, and so having a regional framework is also good, but has to be tailored to specific country needs.
Um, so I would say that in terms of governance, it would be great if we have an agreement overall of how we're going to use these tools, because they are essential for humanity, for the development of humanity. So, and have the safeguards. I think that it's very important that we do democratize, because we want to have a response mechanism available, So in any case, like for example, just as for pandemics, you get a response mechanism. You have a network of organizations surveilling or that may have been working on something that might be helpful for a response. So I think that that is very important that we work on. But also, I would say that, at the moment, and I don't think in the next 5 years, the development of or using this technology for bioweapons will require a huge investment. It will require a huge investment, and it will require a lot of things that are still under control somehow by the mechanisms that exist. For example, the different parts that you need for building a protein, or like in the lab, you need equipment of certain type to test this to see if it works. You need the DNA and all the equipment that takes from these computational hypotheses until the final product. So there's a lot going between that can still be regulated in the physical world. But yes, in somehow, if we're going to put something on the computational models, I guess that it will be, in my perspective, a bit harder. And I think that instead, we should just democratize somehow these models in a responsible way together.
Thank you. This conversation nicely transitions into my next set of questions, which are related to accessibility and equity, because sometimes when we think about the BWC, we are very focused about the prevention of the creation of bioweapons. But another strong pillar of the convention is the peaceful uses of biotechnology. So in that sense, one of my questions will be, what is the current level of access to these tools in Latin America and Africa and perhaps Asia? I mean, could you tell us a little bit about that? Are they clients? Are they producers? Are they users? How do you see it on your research or experience?
From my perspective, from the network, I mean, it is expanding. You know, it started it's a small group of scientists, and now it's almost in the global north. You know, it's in the global north. So, for example, there's several labs in Europe. There's labs in America. There's some labs starting in Asia, and it's like, for example, well, in China and Japan and Korea. There are some labs also working on this. In Latin America, I know that there's a lab in Chile who is trying to drive some training and introduce that technology in Latin America. I don't know much about Ghana, but I was Africa. I was participated in a workshop to try to teach this or at least introduce it in Ghana.
Yes,
Geoffrey, please.
These technologies are still emerging, because accessibility is always a challenge from our side. But since it doesn't need to be physical, you can access it, virtually. Most of the scientists within Africa are already having access to this. I think we talked about the AlphaFold that is used for predicting protein. So most of the scientists in Africa already have access to that, and they have built capacity on that. They have been trained and they are able to efficiently use that tool. And also, there is a lot of capability in AI that are being built. Like I told you that we also run every year, we run a conference where we build we bring expertise in all this AI, biosecurity, biosafety, and we talk about the advancement in the field of synthetic biology, so that our scientists also learn and get inspired by what is going on in the global space. So that way, we are also trying to create awareness and accessibility for that. But also, there are many labs that are already doing high-tech computational work. I can assure you that South Africa is always our focal point in some of these emerging technologies. And so, but generally, we are still getting there. It's not yet like full accessibility, but we are getting there.
One of the articles of the convention is Article 10, and then that's very focused on international cooperation and assistance. So that could be one of the articles that could be used, for example, in the challenges that you are describing. So are there any other structural barriers that exists for the global south in accessing these tools, and what policies could ensure equitable and responsible, as you mentioned, Yensi, access?
I can mention if Cassidy, sorry, do you want to say first?
You go
Okay,
first, Yensi,
thank
please.
you.
Yeah.
So at this stage, and probably in the next 2 years, it will stay the same. So you require high infrastructure of compute, all generative models burn GPUs, and this is very expensive. So you need a server with large capabilities. And also you need a lab where there's like high-end instruments, like a surface plasma resonance or like for purifying protein, FPLC machines. or other equipment. If you want to do parallelization, that's even more expensive. Let's say, some labs have more budgets than other, but every time that you do an experiment, that AI gives you 100 sequence, the best 100 sequences, and you still don't know if they will work. That 100 sequences in genes, in DNA, we're talking about 10,000 euros, $10,000, $5,000 to $10,000. So which lab has $10,000 every time that you want to try an output of an AI that you might get 1 or 2 sequence right? So that's a lot of money too, that is an expensive research. So I think that there's a lot of barriers to bring it. But that said, DNA is becoming cheaper. And what I see, and I can see that can happen for some regions, is that to build infrastructure that is shared, that is regional hubs, or like several countries or one national country built up the capacity on server, and is shared among, because you don't need it. There's a period of using compute, there's a period of going in the lab. And then these things like where you need testing, and when you have to build these gene sequences, you can have also regional hubs for certain experiments. And that could be something that could work, so that scientists could enable have access to them with less, monetary constraints that there is. I know that, for example, in Honduras, there's not even like a defined way to get genes. You cannot buy them. So, like, how do you overcome this? Thank you. Sorry, Cassidy.
No, thank you, Yensi. You just raised excellent points, and I was just going to build off of that. We're currently working on a project where we're looking at how you could have verified structured access while ensuring equity. And what we've seen a lot in the conversations that we've had with researchers from the Global South is that there seems to there's this kind of disconnect of this perception that open sourcing models might just mean that that's equitable, but putting code online and not offering the compute infrastructure is just not sufficient. And so I do think that there just needs to be appreciation of the fact that we can actually improve equity by having cloud-based hosting of models, and this itself then allows for a more structured access approach. And that leads us to another issue that we're working on being able to address, which is a verified access gap, or how do you verify users, researchers that are at institutions in global South countries, and really not just waiting for a passive system to solve this. I think there's a lot that could be built off of the good financial grant practice standard for biosecurity practices, for example. But I think that there needs to be more concerted effort. And when we think on our Article 10, I do think that this could really lead to just very tangible things that member states could do. It could include able to offer compute credit, to be able to access compute. Being able to actually support a cloud-based hosting of different models, and then also actually forwarding along ways in which institutions can be verified, so that we have biosecurity and security by design built in as well too. I think that the International Cooperation Assistance Mechanism, the ICA mechanism that was proposed in the working group report, could potentially be helpful in working out a verified access for biosecurity here. So yeah, I think there's many things that could be done under Article 10 and through that steering group.
Yes, I agree completely with what Cassidy said. And also, another thing that could be done, and is most important, because I think that even with the equipment and opportunities for researchers to join this research field, there's huge barriers. And those barriers are in education, in skills, to enter this, at least at the moment, you require high skills, of computational skills. And I can tell you that this represents a major barrier for women. Only like 18% of the papers published in this in AI or in research includes women. And I see that there's less women involved in this area, and that is a strong bias. So maybe through these mechanisms, there can be like some way to reaching out and developing the skill, to gain this, to be able to use these tools and technologies. Thank you.
Thank you, colleagues. I'm reading there are many questions, but I'm also taking a look at the time. So I think that we may need to do a part 2 and keep the conversation going on this topic. But let's go to the next part, which is wrapping up. And some days ago, we were looking at the current document, the issue by the chair, where it has like 2.5 years of discussions on recommendations on 7 different topics, including the creation of the 2 mechanisms. So I was wondering if you could improve or draft one recommendation in the current negotiating document related to for the topic of this webinar, which will be AI biodesign tools. What will it be, your recommendation? Maybe a new one, or maybe you choose one part of the document and decide to enlarge it or change it. I don't know. Who would like to start? Geoffrey, yes.
Okay, yeah, so I think from our discussion here, it would really be very meaningful to have actually AI biodesign safety framework, something like that. AI biodesign safety framework included in the framework that being developed to capture all the input that the speakers have brought forward, which was really very meaningful, and that will really make sense out of what we have discussed here for the past 1.5 hours to move forward. That's what I can recommend.
Thank you, Geoffrey. Yensi?
So for me, the science and technology advisory mechanism, it sounded like it's super important for this. It's very important to like have this connection with also research and have this mechanism in place, that can help governments, to kind of evolve and move and learn about what is happening, so that everything can move forward accordingly, not react too late.
And building off of that, Yensi, I couldn't agree more. I think that the establishment of the Science and Technology Advisory Mechanism would be an excellent start. So would fully endorse the adoption. I would also say that maybe, especially based on the conversation here today, there could be a mandate that its first broad theme for review that's discussed. It could be the convergence of artificial intelligence in the life sciences. And I think that there could be a few things that the advisory mechanism ends up looking at, everything from thinking on positive ways that we could use AI developments, maybe even thinking on encouraging a digital verification exercise, looking at AI-driven open source intelligence. We could also, as we were discussing before as well, how we, in Annex 2, we talk on Article 10 assistance, instead of like just focusing as we traditionally did on exchange of equipment, could we focus on exchange of compute resources and secure access to compute resources? And then also thinking on codes of conduct. Tianjin biosecurity guidelines are a great start, but they're mostly oriented towards wet lab scientists. What would it mean if we fully looked on at the developments in AI and the life sciences? Do we need to have biosecurity training for computer scientists and AI engineers and expectations on this? So in developing and updating those voluntary codes of practices could be another thing that the mechanism looks at.
Yeah, I think my recommendation is fairly similar and draws on what others have said. but I would recommend that there is an explicit link made between the Science and Technology Advisory Mechanism and the International Cooperation and Assistance Mechanism, and that within the S&T Advisory Mechanism, there is systematic horizon scanning and situational awareness built in for emerging technologies with a theme on AI-enabled biological design or something to that effect. And that should feed in directly and transparently into the ICA mechanism, which should enable state parties to request support to strengthen their national implementation systems early. And I think that will then proactively close security loopholes before they become vulnerabilities. So I would put in something quite explicit on that front from my perspective.
Thank you, colleagues. For our audience, I mean, this is one of the first webinars that we are launching. So there are more upcoming, and you will see progressively what are the topics. But we are interested to know what you are interested on and how we can cater this interest through the expertise and conversations. So we are going to be sharing a questionnaire, like some questions about how you can provide the feedback to this. And in the meantime that you're doing that, I have one last question for all the panelists. And that question will be, because as I mentioned, we are going to have more topics on emerging technologies and the convergence with biotechnology and how they are relevant to the BWC. So my last question to you all will be, beyond AI biodesign tools, what AI-enabled technologies in the life sciences could also be relevant for the BWC, and that it will be worth hosting another webinar or a part 2, part 3 about AI-enabled technologies? Maybe we can start with you, Cassidy.
No worries. Yeah, so I do think that one area that we haven't discussed on today that would be important to cover would be on large language models, which can now offer access to PhD level knowledge and practical troubleshooting, including in multimodal formats. And so historically, we've relied on tacit knowledge as being a main barrier to biological weapon development, where there would be failure due to lack of hands-on expertise. We've seen now with evaluations that have come out with regards to large language models, including the Virology's capabilities test earlier this year from Secure Bio and Center for AI Safety, that really the tacit knowledge barriers have drastically reduced because of large language model capability leaps. And so it's now possible with the leading frontier models to use images or text to help troubleshoot through basic wet lab issues and problems. And this tacit knowledge barrier is very rapidly disintegrating and has implications for the threat as we go forward. And so one for the BWC to consider in depth, I believe.
I think my response is similar to Cassidy in that I think large language models, and particularly generative models, that could produce persuasive text, audio, video, could also be really relevant in spreading disinformation during biological incidents. And that can also work towards undermining confidence in public health messaging or cast doubt on attributions of BWC violations. And so I think this could also be used to generate plausible but misleading justifications or paper trails to perhaps also disguise prohibited work as legitimate research. So I think that component we really haven't unpacked and is also something for the BWC to be aware of.
I agree with Sana and Cassidy. And would I like to add, for example, there's some other technologies that may be very useful for certain for surveillance, for example, and is the use of these models for data analysis, and prediction of epidemics, pandemics, and this kind of large information management. Yes, other than that, I agree completely with Sana, Cassidy.
Yes, and also in the field of synthetic biology, we are going almost into full automation because I'm sure you are where you can actually program everything from designing, building, testing, and then you just do the learning part. We have robotics that does for you everything. I've seen this technology. One person alone can run thousands of samples, without the help of any other person. You just sit on your computer, you program all the modules, for designing, all the robotics will do the work for you. So that is where we are going. Actually, there are already a good network of biofoundry across the continents, and it is even increasing more and more. But again, the more advanced technology that we are heading to is cloud laboratory. In the coming years, we will not need to have a physical lab. You run all your experiment on the cloud. Yes, so this is another emerging, technology in the field of synthetic biology, and I've seen it's actually coming rapidly, and this now bypasses, the conventional biosecurity checks that we have been talking about. So you cannot now regulate the same way you used to regulate the physical laboratory setup. So that is something that BWC should take note of. Cloud laboratory is coming. We don't need a physical lab. Everything you do on the cloud, and also full automation, the biofoundry are emerging almost everywhere. So those two are the technology that BWC has to take note of. Yeah.
Thank you all for sharing your expertise and your time. For our audience, I would like to invite you to our next event that will take place on the 4th of December, and it's going to be about cyber biosecurity. And the next one in January is going to be focusing on artificial general intelligence and frontier AI and how all these technologies are relevant to the BWC. Please do fill up the feedback. We really need to know how to do it better. And please join me in thanking our speakers and thanking also Nick Arndt from UNIDIR. And I look forward to seeing you next time. Bye-bye.